first off, do we just start with an overview, if you can, of what you've been working on, what you discovered, just the kind of 50-foot view from above?
Sure. Well, this particular paper is part of a kind of long-term research effort to understand the early peoples of the Great Basin, so of Eastern Oregon. And our paper that just came out is a kind of a synthesis study and reporting of some new findings, particularly from three different shelters, focused primarily on one of them. Um, these are three rock shelters found about an hour and a half to 2 hours southeast of Bend, for reference, where they're at. And we report new radiocarbon and taxonomic information about perishable items that date to the late Pleistocene. So things made of fiber, wood, and leather from these shelters that really broaden and our view and kind of provide a lot of like fresh details about life at the end of the Ice Age in Eastern Oregon. That's really broad.
No, I appreciate that. And just remind us for the novices, what time period are we talking? How many
Sure.
years ago is
Yeah, that's right.
this?
I always forget that. I live in this. So,
Yeah, no
yeah, so
worries.
what we're talking about is the end of the last ice age, or the late Pleistocene is the geologic term. And this is a geologic epoch from about 2.2 million to 11,700 years ago. And where we're talking about here in Eastern Oregon, we're talking about between about 12,900 and 11,700 years ago in this period called the Younger Dryas, which is also just another climatic period. And what this is a kind of this global cold snap that returned most of the northern hemispheres around the planet back into the Ice Age. And at the end of that is the end of the Ice Age, and it enters into the Holocene, which is our current geologic epoch. So that's what we're talking. We're talking between about 12,900 and 11,700 years ago.
Does this change at all what we knew about this period or how we viewed it before?
Sure. I mean, it doesn't as much change what we know about it as much as it adds lots of context, right? These findings aren't surprising in the sense that like we didn't think people had these things because we know they had to have had them to live at this time and in this place. It's that these types of items never preserved in the archaeological record or rarely preserved. And so the fact that they did in these few little places and we were able to, find them and report on them is giving these new sorts of details about people's lives and their technology and their culture at this time. And so it is new, but it isn't new, if that makes any sense.
It kind of does,
Yeah.
honestly. And I'm glad you brought that up too, because yeah, that was our biggest question is like, how did this preserve, especially its organic material? So what was different about these materials that allowed them to survive?
Yeah, so there's really two types of environments where archaeological materials preserve for long periods of time, and one of them is like anaerobic environments, so things that are constantly wet and are always wet, or in our situation here in Eastern Oregon, it's where things are dry. And so they've just not been exposed to water over the last, 12,000 plus years because they were in these rock shelters, and the rock shelters are protected from the rain and the moisture, and it's the high desert, and so it's kind of just these unique kind of geologic situations where these shelters are protected and people came and stay in them because they're protected, right? And they leave their stuff and sand blows in and covers it up, and that process repeats over thousands of years, and things get preserved there. And they're kind of like these really nice time capsules of archaeology, but also environmental information too, which we actually got a lot of interesting environmental information from this stuff as well.
Kind of a two-parter, but I guess yeah, what is the process of finding these things? And two, like how did this area get on your radar? Obviously, you knew there were people in this area, but why this specific where you were looking specifically? And tell us about the process of like uncovering these items.
Yeah, sure. Well, a point of interest, I mean, archaeological research has been happening in this part of Oregon since the 1930s. So, me and my colleagues and other people have active research on all sorts of questions in cultural resource management, so managing, archaeological sites on public lands out there. So, this is my whole life and my colleagues, like our whole lives, research lives are out there doing that. So that's why we're kind of attuned to these. Now the process is complex in a couple ways with this project. Is two of the sites, the Conley Caves and the Paisley Caves, that we bring information in. Those were part of, professional archaeological excavations ran through the University of Oregon and the University of Nevada, Reno, who has helped, where we've taught field schools. So we teach students archaeological field methods alongside doing research. So it's like paired with education and research. So we targeted those places because they preserve these rare things of organic things, not necessarily just, objects, but like animal bones and plant remains. Like those tell us a lot more than just stone tools, which is what most people think of when they think of archaeology. The main kind of focus of the paper is about a site called Cougar Mountain Cave, which was actually excavated by a non-professional in the late 1950s, and it was kind of in private hands and then a private museum until the last, few years, whenever we started working with the museum, the Fayetteville Museum in Klamath Falls, to do research on the materials that were recovered. And so we knew based on kind of his work and his report that these things were pretty old. But exactly how old and how they related to one another and what they were was all a big question. And we wanted to pursue those questions.
You kind of already answered this, but does it tell us anything new about these people, especially with the idea that these things were like stitched together? I thought I read in the article that we'd really never seen anything kind of created this way from that far ago. So does it teach us anything new about how they were living or their processes?
Sure. Well, there's a couple things like, and we're using these broad terms like these people, but what these were the ancestors of modern native peoples who lived in the
Okay,
area today. So let's
very
make
good.
that clear. Like
Thank
these
you.
are Native Americans, just a long time ago, right? Their descendants are alive today, living full lives, right? Um, but I mean, something that's kind of new is this for the late Pleistocene or this Younger Dryas period, this Ice Age period. There's been a lot of research like on the Great Plains and in northeastern North America where, like bison, for instance, on the plains or up in the northeast where you think of the ice, the walls, the ice sheets during the Ice Age where people are really attuned to the cold. And those have kind of been those areas where that research has happened. And here in the Great Basin, most of the archaeological record is about the fiber industry. So, like things made from plant fibers. And we don't see sewn leather or hide clothing that much. But what we argue in the paper, based on these findings, is yes, in the Holocene that's the case. But what we think is happening is the late Pleistocene, it was climatically and environmentally different enough that people were kind of more attuned to using tight-fitting sewn clothing more than later. So that's a kind of a new finding that we're kind of putting forth is it's really this correlation between culture, technology, and climate, and how that changes across different climatic periods.
Wonderful. Is there a process to like proving this? I guess when you make these big discoveries or come out with these papers, are there people in the community that are like, "Oh, really now?" Or like, I guess what is this process of
Yeah.
like proving it, not to be a naysayer?
Sure. No, I mean that's what scientific research is, right? Is we create hypotheses and models and we test them and we try to prove ourselves wrong because there's always new information out there. So in terms of just the basic data, like how old these things are and what they were made out of, and which is our major findings, those things are pretty much indisputable. Just based on these are analytical techniques that are been replicated hundreds of thousands of times. Um, the more complex thing to prove, quote unquote, is like this idea about the correlation between culture and cultural adaptation and climate. And those aren't really things that you set out to prove, really. I mean, these are working ideas in archaeology. We're working with such a fragmentary little piece of the past. Like it can only tell you so much if that makes sense. So like we know these things are this old and this is what they used and how that picture comes together is always changing and interpretable by different people, right? So um, it just takes good science, good methods, sound hypotheses, and then having an open mind about things.
I guess last thing is what's next for you guys? Is there more to be done in this area? Is there anything on your radar?
Sure. I mean, we're going to continue to do research out in Eastern Oregon, as we have been for decades. At these particular sites, we're not doing any field work, but we have, ongoing analyses with the collections of things that are in the museums. It's a really time-consuming process. But we're also the University of Nevada, Reno, and the University of Oregon are kind of partnering with some of the local tribal communities to run our field schools over the next few years that are more focused on training tribal members and other students in archaeological methods for management of cultural resources. And so we have a ton of research that we've been doing, but our next kind of stage is to take that more into like more education and more service to the community. So, but we're going to keep doing work out in this area, I hope, the rest of my life. So we'll see.
Are digs or any of this like open to the public ever? Can we come watch or, or anything like that ever? Or is this like super you want people away?
Yeah, I mean, when excavations do happen, it's really up to the whoever's doing the work. And we, at our excavations over the last 10 years, we've had hundreds of visitors. And it really it's just about that particular situation. So sometimes they are, sometimes things are really sensitive and it's not good to have the public there. Um, or maybe different stakeholders don't want it, advertised. So it just depends. Just keep an eye out. Usually when there are options for public involvement and like coming to see, there's usually announcements or whoever's doing that work will let it be known.
Very good. I really appreciate it, Richie. Is there anything else you'd like to add that we didn't touch on?
Yeah, one thing I want to say too is some of the techniques of the way that these things were made. So particularly this thing called twining, which is really just a way to make basketry or mats that we dated to over 12,000 years ago. It's this technique and how to do these things. That is exactly the way that Klamath and Paiute people were making basketry at contact when Euro Americans first arrived, and still today, of course. And so we're talking about, and then between then and now, this is consistently found through the archaeological record in the area. And so there's few places in the world where you can trace kind of this technological knowledge and traditional knowledge over this many millennia. And it's really special and drives home how close a ties that modern indigenous communities have to Oregon. And that's one of the things we want to try to highlight this.